Good morning, friends. And let me begin by thanking NSE for tolerating me for the second time in 3 days for making a talk. So the talk I'm going to give this morning is quite different from the one I gave just 48 hours earlier. That one was on the art of doing reforms. And this one is going to be a somewhat topical topic now. Which is about the performance of Indian states since 1960, and specifically about India's eastern problem. Now, why is this an important issue? It's an important issue because very often you will see in TV debates, in newspaper articles, and even in policy debates about India's north-south divide. In fact, by any if you look at the socio-economic indicators of this country, it will be very, very easily clear to you that the real divide in India is actually east-west. The eastern half of India is much, much poorer than the western half. In fact, this is so strong that it even shows up in large states where the western half is much richer than the eastern half. So if you take UP, for example, western UP is much richer than eastern UP. Madhya Pradesh, western Madhya Pradesh has per capita incomes much higher than eastern. This is even true of this state, where the western side of Maharashtra is richer than the eastern side. So this east-west problem that we have is a very serious one, and it takes up particular interest in the context of recent political developments. And I will show you why the revival of Kolkata in specifically is an extremely important part of national strategy. So let's go back right to the beginning. How do we think about relative performance of states? What's a good measure of it? Well, it turns out that we have good state level data only from 1960, which is comparable across the country. So this, if we truthfully want to do this properly, we can only do it from 1960 onwards, because that's how the data is. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to look at share of India's GDP, that is the state divided by the sum of the gross GSDP. And then I'm going to also look at relative per capita income, which is the ratio of the per capita income, that is the net state development product of the state, as a percentage of the all India per capita. So I've deliberately, as you can see, the way I'm going to tell this story, looked at relative performance in order to get rid of, one, the inflation issue, and secondly, not to get confused by general growth of the country, because this is about the relative growth of the country. Now, let's go back to 1960, which is, as I said, the earliest data we have. And what were the top 5 states? The top 5 states in 1960-61 accounted for more than half of the country's economy. And the top economies were Uttar Pradesh. This is, by the way, undivided Uttar Pradesh, because obviously for comparability I have used undivided UP. And it was 14.4% of the economy. It was by some margin the largest economy in the country, which is not surprising. It was also the largest state by population. And for a heavily agricultural economy at that time, this was the biggest economic powerhouse of the country. The second was Maharashtra at 12.5%. So Maharashtra was always an important economic engine. Then was West Bengal at 10.5%. Now this is quite remarkable, because do remember that most of Bengal had actually been lost to partition. So in 1960-61, post-partition, West Bengal still accounted for 10.5% of the economy. In fact, Kolkata itself was more important than Mumbai. So yes, Maharashtra as a whole did better, but if you take Kolkata, compare it to Mumbai, Kolkata was a more important commercial hub. And as I said, this is despite partition, and also despite the fact that by this point, we already had another very discriminatory policy in place called the freight equalization. Then you had Tamil Nadu 8.7%, and then undivided Bihar at 7.8%. These were the top 5, and together they accounted for more than half of the economy. Now notice here something important. 2 of the states are all obviously very big agricultural states, so they are there. But the other 3 states were basically here because of some level of industrial urban prowess. Why? Because the 3 presidency towns, Bombay, Calcutta and Madras, which is what they were called at that time, were home to the largest industrial clusters. So therefore, Maharashtra, West Bengal and Tamil Nadu were there. And it is also important to remember, we have very often justification for the 5-year plans and that kind of planned socialist policies based on the idea that India did not have an industrial base and somehow we needed to do these planned economies in order to industrialize quickly. This is actually not true at all. Kolkata, for example, in 1950 was the single most important industrial hub in Asia. Japan had been the bigger one, but remember, Japan had been bombed to the ground. So in 1950, some of the largest industrial sort of hubs in the world, Kolkata was one of them. And of course, as I said, UP and Bihar were very important. Interestingly, Bihar's share was greater than that of Karnataka, Gujarat, and so on in 1960-61. So do remember that Bihar at that stage would have been well ahead. Then what happened? Here is the changing trajectory of some of the states. So here for showing 5 states together would have been difficult, so I've just shown 3 here. Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and West Bengal. Look at what happened to them. Maharashtra obviously went up and down over the next 65 odd years. But you can see that by and large it's steady, it goes up a little bit. So it starts out at, if you saw, it was I think 12.5%, yes. And now it is about 14.6%. So after a 65 years, so 2/3 of a century later, share has gone up. And it is now the largest economy in the country. You all know that GST collections, everything reflects this. So this is not surprising. But this is not a case of suddenly doing very well. It's a relatively steady performance. The next state is Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu was one of the top 5. Then interestingly, its share declined. So this idea that the South was always doing better is not true. It was actually doing worse till 1991. And you can see its share was falling. Like most of southern India, its performance really improved after 1991. So it is peninsular India that really benefited for liberalization. And you can see its share is now at 10%. Not bad. But the saddest story in some ways is that of West Bengal. It started out as 3rd largest economy. And it is almost a straight line downwards. It went from something in the range of, if you look, West Bengal 10.5%. So its share of India's economy was greater in 60-70 than what Tamil Nadu has today. And you can see it is now 5.8%. It is almost directly going down continuously throughout this phase. So this decline of West Bengal, which we all know happened, is something that is very visible in the numbers. There was a small bounce you can see around about the year 2000, but then that didn't last, and it has basically gone down steadily. What happened to Bihar and UP? Again, as I said, for long periods of time we have to use the combined states, so do remember that. But you can see that in both cases they lost ground. They steadily went down from basically 1960-61 till very recently, basically to the COVID period. In the last 4-5 years it has, in the case of UP, jumped up. In the case of Bihar, about for 10 years or so, it has been flat. So an improved performance from UP and at least no longer deteriorating in the case of Bihar. Now, the UP jump is also, as I said, very, very recent. It's just the last 5 years. But even after this jump, do remember that it is, doing only a little bit more than a much smaller state like Tamil Nadu. Now, there are other parts of the country. So the first point should be fairly established by now, that Western India did reasonably well, Southern India did well, and I will show you more data on this. Eastern India, both Bihar in one sort of sense, which is in an agricultural state that went into decline, and in the case of Bengal, an industrial state that went into decline. Both of these show that Eastern India had a problem. There is a longer paper on this whole thing on the ESEPM website, which you can always look up. For all the states, data is there. I have, just for purposes of presentation, I've stuck to giving few examples. But look at what happens in other places also. And in this context, the relative performance of Haryana and Punjab is also quite striking. Many people tend to have this impression that Punjab is one of our richer states. This has actually not been true for a fairly long time. What happened is, in the 1960s and 70s, Punjab did very, very well. Its share of national GDP went up from 3.2% to 4.4%. You can see that jumping up. That is the Green Revolution that you will remember. But after that, it was kind of flat through the 70s, and from the 80s onwards, it's basically been declining. And today, it accounts for just 2.7% of national GDP. This is less than that of just Delhi National Territory, not Delhi NCR, just the Delhi National Territory, just the state of Delhi. So the decline of Punjab since the 80s is quite dramatic. And contrast that with Haryana. Very much similar states right next to each other, have this, also went through the agricultural, that green revolution, see 1.9 to 2.7. But then it has continued to grow, and today it contributes 3.9% of GDP. Now all of these tell a very consistent story throughout. That is the urban hubs and industrial and later services sectors that drive growth. And if it gets derailed, that is what derails the whole thing. So for example, in what happened in Bengal, of course, as you know, the decline of Kolkata, starting with the late 70s, but really in the 80s, with industrial strikes, power cuts, all kinds of disruption, and you kind of see that decline. In the case of Punjab, which is, by the way, another partition state, a somewhat different thing happened. There, ironically, it was trapped by its own agricultural success. So what happens is that it succeeds in the beginning, but in most of the world what happens is that the excess surpluses generated by agriculture are taken into slowly industrializing and urbanizing the states. That's what's happened around the world. But in Punjab, this does not happen. There are many reasons for this. One of them, of course, is that the 1980s, where the transition should have happened, was a very troubled time in Punjab. So therefore, the urbanization, industrialization process that should have kind of taken off did not take off. This then got compounded by another factor, which, by the way, both Punjab and Bengal suffer from, is the flight of young people. So in the case of Bengal, they left, many of them came to places like Mumbai, Gurgaon, Bangalore. In fact, a lot of Bangalore's tech expansion happened through talent coming from Kolkata. In the case of Punjab, much of it simply left the country and went to places like Canada. So both of them suffered this decline. Meanwhile, Haryana went through the agricultural boom, fine. But after that, it then began to industrialize. So this is the story of Maruti, for example, the growth of Gurgaon. This is what has been driving Haryana's economic engine. Okay, so meanwhile, what is going on in the rest of the country? So as I said, prior to 1991, the shares of Andhra Pradesh, that's United Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala in India's GDP was broadly flat, and that of Tamil Nadu was actually declining. So till 1991, nobody thought of the South as being particularly dynamic part of India. Delhi saw its share jump up from 1.4% in 1960-61 to 3.9% that is now. Again, showing you importance of an urban hub, how urban hubs have generated most of India's growth, contrary to this idea that till very recently we were somehow an agricultural-driven economy. Gujarat has a significant increase in its share in the last 2 decades. It went up from 6.4% in 2000 to 8% in 23-24. Very important because it is not just the southern states that have done particularly well in the last 20-25 years. It's actually also the story of Gujarat. Gujarat was not considered a particularly successful, exciting state till basically the last 25 odd years. We forget all of these because we have tended to remember, we have this lens which gets clouded by recent performance. Now, as I said, this is how India looks in 24-25. This is the latest data we have for state GDP. So, today, Maharashtra is 14.5% of the economy, I told you. It is the largest. It was number 2, now it's number 1. Tamil Nadu, which had dropped out, has come back. It is now 10% of the economy. Undivided Uttar Pradesh is 9.6%, so it's still there. Karnataka is now, which was nowhere in the scene, is now 9.3% of the economy. Obviously driven a lot by Bangalore success. And Gujarat is 8% of the national economy. So these are the largest states today, and you can clearly tell how that mix has changed. Now I'm going to look at per capita income. Okay? So this is, we saw GDP shares now relative to the national average. So who were the sort of relatively rich states in India in 1960-61? Now for the purposes of this presentation, I have excluded small states that have less than 1% of India's GDP, so that otherwise you will have places like Sikkim, etc. dominating this chart. So Delhi, 1960-61, had the highest per capita income at almost more than double the national average. Maharashtra was 34% higher. This, remember, West Bengal in 1960-61 had a per capita income that was about 28% higher than the national average. So it was richer than the average Bengali was richer than the average Indian. And this is despite the trauma of partition. Punjab was 20% higher than the national average. And as I said, contrary to popular belief, Punjab was actually poorer than West Bengal. And then Gujarat was again about 18% above national average. Again, significantly poorer than West Bengal. And then of course the other states were much, much lower. Bihar, although it, even at that stage, was a very poor state, and as was Odisha, with about 70-71% of the national average. So even then, even though Bihar, as I said, was a large share of the overall economy, in per capita terms, it was even then a very poor state. And so was Odisha. Now look at what happens. The performances of Maharashtra and Gujarat and their contrast. And again, I'm giving these pairs because at some point, they are, not only are they next to each other, some point in time they were basically one state. Whether it's Haryana-Punjab combination, Gujarat-Maharashtra combination, because it then gives you a natural experiment to tell how things developed. So if you go back to 60, 61, 71, you can see they're roughly the same per capita income. After that, interestingly, Maharashtra has a steady performance. It has always been richer than the national average, and it has kept going up and up. It was steady through the 90s, and in relatively recent times, it has gone up a little bit more in the last 20 years. And today, Maharashtra's per capita income is about 51% higher than the national average. But look at what has happened to Gujarat. Gujarat actually did worse than Maharashtra for many decades. In fact, it was basically at national average till the year 2000. And it's after 2000 that the performance has gone up. It is now 60% higher than the national average. But this is really the last 25 years of performance. When you talk about the Gujarat model and then Chief Minister Narendra Modi's performance, this is the performance that you are talking about, this jump in the last 25 odd years. It was not considered before that to be a particularly forward-looking state or particularly conducive to business and so on. And as I said, we have this mental impression that Gujaratis were always, very entrepreneurial and so on. If you go back a century back, Bengalis were considered actually to be the more entrepreneurial people. Yeah. My own great-grandfather ran one of the world's largest cotton mills called Mohini Mills. It ended up on the wrong side of the border is a different matter. But I'm just telling you this, that how impressions have changed in the world. Now look at the trajectories of some of our eastern states. You can see that Odisha was always a very poor state, I told you. It is only in relatively recent times that it has begun to see its share. In fact, in the first 4 decades after independence, its per capita income as proportion of national average actually declined. So if you went back to the years in the 1990s, per capita income in Odisha was half of that of the national average. It was considered, you will remember pictures of Kalahandi and so on. So it actually was deteriorating over time through those 4 decades. Then in the last 3 decades or so, it has significantly improved. This is, of course, Naveen Babu's performance that we are looking at. And it is today something like 82% of the national average. So still below national average, but now only 17%, not 50% below national average. But look at what happened to West Bengal. West Bengal has been an absolute straight line down from 1960-61. It was, as I said, 27% higher in per capita income. It declined. There was a small bounce around the year 2000, and then it continued to decline. Today, it is just 80% of the national average, which is 20% below the national average. Interestingly, it is below the proportion is below that of Odisha. So Odisha, which in my own childhood, in Bengal, you would find a lot of the household help, the workers, etc., used to come from 2 states, Bihar and Odisha. But Odisha today has a per capita income that is higher and growing faster than that of West Bengal. Again, instructive, Haryana, Punjab. As I said, these twins are very useful to get a sense of relative performance. Punjab, as I said, in 1960 was richer on average than the average Indian, but it was below West Bengal. It was only about 20% higher per capita income. The Green Revolution was quite something. That suddenly it went within 1 decade to go from 20% to 69% above. So just imagine, 20% to 70% above the national average in 1 decade during the Green Revolution. So the Green Revolution was for Punjab a really dramatic event. But since then, it has underperformed. And underperformed and underperformed. So much so, as you can see, it has now fallen back to the national average. In terms of relative performance, it's actually worse today than it was in 1960-61. This is the story of Punjab and how it has steadily fallen behind the rest of the country. Its inability to industrialize, its inability to retain its young talent and so on, this is where it shows up. Meanwhile, look at what has happened to Haryana. Haryana was actually the poor cousin. In 1960-61, it was just a little bit above the national average. Now it is well above the national average, as you can see here. Yeah? What about the southern states? Today, whether it's national debates of various kinds, you hear about the southern states have done so much better, all kinds of. But in fact, the southern states have only really begun to do well since 1991. In 1991, all the southern states were below the national average. Please note. So all the talk, their socio-economic indicators were very good and all of this. Well, do remember that their economic performance was not better than the rest of the country. The real change was not all this social policy. The real change was liberalization. And the advantage southern India took of it. This is obviously true of Bangalore more visibly, but was also true of Hyderabad, of Chennai, and so on. You can see the performance, obviously, in the red. Telangana has been the most successful of this. It has gone from being among the poorest of the southern states to being now 89% higher than the national average. This is the performance of Hyderabad. When you go to Hyderabad, you can see it. Don't take my word for it. It is clearly richer than the others. But contrast it, meanwhile, with its twin, Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh has also performed better than the national average, but it is distinctly below. It's in fact the poorest of the southern states. This is the story of the loss of Hyderabad. So again, making the point that urban hubs drive this growth impetus comes from the urban hub. And the resources that are generated by those high growth hubs is then spread in various ways to other things. So having these high growth hubs is absolutely critical. And this is true across the country. So when we say Maharashtra does well, Maharashtra is doing well in the sense that Mumbai, Pune is doing well. And maybe a little bit of a hub around Nagpur. Gujarat is doing well means basically that Surat, Ahmedabad, Rajkot area is doing particularly well. Now some of the money from that then gets spread to other things, but this is the real spine of the growth. When you are saying, the Delhi NCR area is doing well, it is, when you're saying Haryana is doing well, it's basically Delhi NCR, the spillover that is doing very well. So it's really one major hub that is generating all the growth. And therefore, the importance here, as I said, of urban hubs in eastern India. The poorer performance of eastern India relative to the rest of the country, notwithstanding some improvement in Odisha, is the failure in some ways of Kolkata to act as a high growth driver in the eastern part of the country. Even today, after all this long period of decline, and having lost its position as India's most important industrial commercial hub in the 70s to Mumbai and never recovered it, even despite now half a century having passed, it is still by some margin the largest urban and economic hub in eastern half of the country. So, if you want to bring the eastern half of the country back, it is absolutely critical to get Kolkata to fire again. Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, again, twins of sort. And you can see here, in both cases, continuous decline. In around about 2000, it begins to stabilize. And in very recent times, you can see UP is beginning to improve. But do remember that Bihar is well below national average. It is genuinely poor. Okay? 39% of national average. That's 60% below the national average. That's incredible how much below the national average it is. And this is after things have stabilized. It was earlier deteriorating very, very rapidly. And it started out being poor, but it is now desperately poor. Just to put it in context, Sikkim, which is, of course, small state, but it is the richest per capita income state in the country, is at 300% of national average. In other words, an average Sikkimese is 10 times richer than the average Bihari. It's not a small. Similarly, Goa, also a small state, 250 national average. Small state, but it gives you a flavor of how big the difference is. So, after all of this, where are we in 2024, 25? Delhi, of the major states, I'm leaving out here, as I said, states which have less than 1% of national GDP, strip them out. Then of major states, Delhi is 240 of national average. So, Telangana 189, Karnataka 186, Tamil Nadu 176, Haryana 172. These are, in per capita terms, our richest states. Below this, you'll get Gujarat and others as well. But you can see what's going on here. In every single case, you can tell that some urban engine drove it. Delhi itself is a city. Telangana is all about Hyderabad's high growth. Karnataka, obviously, everybody knows, is Bengaluru and its connected urban hubs like Mysore. Tamil Nadu is about Chennai, but also about Coimbatore and a few other hubs. Tamil Nadu has a more dispersed urban configuration. And Haryana is basically about Gurgaon and the stretch of urban industrial thing that goes all the way along the highway towards Jaipur in one side and Sonepat on the other side. So these are the industrial hubs that have benefited Haryana. So, what can we say in summary? The summary is that the southern states since 1991 have emerged as leading performers. The 5 states collectively now account for approximately 30% of India's GDP. So this is a very good performance, but it is a relatively recent performance. Western states have also done quite well. Maharashtra and Gujarat have consistently done well, but as I showed you, Maharashtra has been a consistent performer throughout the phase, relatively the ups and downs. Gujarat really has been more consistent in the last 20-25 years. Then there are, of course, places like Goa, etc., that have done well. Rajasthan, I didn't mention it, but Rajasthan has actually been a decent performer since the 2000s, but much of it coming from the area around Jaipur and its linkages through to the Delhi NCR. In some ways, it is an extension of Delhi NCR. And of course, in the north, you have Delhi, Haryana also. But again, as I said, Punjab has worsened all accounts. So if you have this mental image of Punjab being one of the more economically powerful, relatively rich states, it is no longer the case. It may have a very visible group of relatively rich farmers, etc., benefiting from MSP or whatever you may say. That may be the case, but on average, it is not a particularly remarkable state in per capita terms. And if you look at it over time, except for the massive spurt in the 60s and 70s, it has now been in continuous decline for basically also half a century. The eastern part of the country, as I mentioned, is a special problem. West Bengal has experienced continuous decline in economic performance for now 6.5 decades. So even before the communists took over, its share was declining because of freight equalization and other reasons. But since then, of course, it has been an absolutely almost catastrophic decline. Bihar's relative position has stabilized in relatively recent times, but not improving. But so at a very low level, it has stabilized. And UP has begun to see some uptick in very recent times, last 5 years. Odisha is an interesting state. Many people don't consider it to be a particularly high performance state, but in fact, although from a very low level, it has actually done decently well. And as I showed you, it now actually has a per capita income which is a little bit higher even than Bengal. Now, throughout this story, a point I made is that a few high growth urban hubs are critical to generating high growth. Eastern India's problem is that its heavyweight, Kolkata, has not been pumping for, as I said, half a century at least. It's a bit sad because it's my hometown, but I am witness to what happened to to Kolkata in the 80s in particular. I keep stating this. Kolkata did not die, it was murdered. And I am a witness to that murder. It did not only see, the deindustrialization that happened. Once it went into that loop, the culture, it took with it all the other dynamics of society. We Bengalis are very proud of our culture, but the cultural institutions declined. The educational institutions declined. And then, of course, the young left. So, net result of it is, now that the the political configurations in Eastern India have suddenly shifted very dramatically, we can begin to think of it in a very different way. After a very, very long time, there is actually the political dispensation both in Bengal and in the center is the same. For the very first time in 2 generations, the underlying sort of economic philosophy of the regime is pro-growth and so on. And this is not only important from the perspective of West Bengal or Kolkata itself. As I told you, it is a critical part of getting eastern half of India to fire again. In the end, Bhubaneswar, Patna, Ranchi, Guwahati are very, very small places compared to Kolkata. Even if you combine all of them, they are still smaller than Kolkata as economic hubs. So it's really our best bet, not just West Bengal generally, but specifically getting Kolkata to fire, has to be a national project that we need to all contribute to, and I hope people in the audience will also be willing to contribute to this cause. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.